Ladies, gentlemen, and friends beyond the binary, welcome back to Collecting Issues, where this week we'll be taking a look at Thor, Prey, collecting issues 7 to 14 of the 2020 run on the character by Donny Cates, Nic Klein, Matthew Wilson, and Aaron Cooder. Oh, so close. With covers by Olivier Coipel.
So the comic book education continues?
We're talking inappropriate comic books.
You're into comic books, aren't you?
That's comic book shit.
Like in the comic books.
Very good, Benjamin. You are obsessed with cougars, as always. Welcome back to Collecting Issues, the monthly comic book club, where Ben and I this month are struggling to remember how to do this because it feels like it's been a very long time.
It's been so long, Michael. This week we're taking a look at a comic in which Thor suffers the consequences of playing God, slice by bloody slice. There's so much in this comic.
So much going on. Benjamin, it's interesting that you've even said suffers the consequences of playing God rather than being a god. We'll get into it.
We'll get into it on this podcast.
We'll get into it.
The other things that you can look forward to on this podcast is why Odin was always bloody terrible. He's the worst.
He's a bad
He's
bloke.
the worst.
Oh, he's the Jordan B. Peterson of deities.
What you have to understand, son, is that it's a crucible. It's hardship. You've got to go through it.
Yeah. No, let's not let the podcast evolve into bad Jordan B. Peterson impersonations.
I say we do the exact opposite and just descend into madness. The second thing we look at is why Norse mythology remains absolutely essential to comic book Thor. I don't care, Taika Waititi, that you made him an alien and put him in space. I don't care.
Doesn't matter. Do you remember the frogs in the original myths? They're back.
They're back, and now we've got a really, really great case study of why frogs make great bloody gods.
Everybody loves Throg, Ben.
And then I think one of my favourite things about this, Michael, is Nic Klein's art. It's splash pages everywhere, brilliant paneling. Mwah. Mwah, 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 mwah. Chef's kisses.
Yeah, look, Benjamin, platonic ideal of comic book art. There's not too much to say about it other than it's fucking great.
It's fucking great. And then one of my favourite bits about this, Michael, is it's pulling on our wee Granty M. There's a Grant Morrison-esque dip into the Thor lore going on, but very restrained, very tasteful.
I see what you're saying. It's interesting. Benjamin, you haven't really highlighted this here, but I think what this really is an effort to tell a story, to try and make sense of the weird place in comics that Thor exists in. More than nearly any other character, Thor straddles the lines of mythology, comic books, superheroes, science, magic, and you can't make it make sense. You just can't. You can't
don't even
make
try.
the history of Thor make sense. So just fucking have fun with it. Just pick a bit you like and run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's your first time listening to Collecting Issues. First of all, bloody welcome. How are you?
Hello there.
Give us an
Hi.
If it's your first time, give us a review, give us a follow. This is the way it works. We'll start off the episode by giving you an elevator pitch. We're going to tell you what Donny Cates is up to, what he's aiming for, and we'll try not to spoil it in case you haven't read it. But if you haven't read it, off you go. Go read it.
On your bike. Hop off. Imagine it's Sunday night in Ireland and you're listening to my mother and she says, off you pop now. Time to go and read the comic and then come back.
I would imagine each and every one of those claps has been clipped out by our audio editing software, but that's fine. That's
Stupid
fine.
audio editing
Again.
software. Clipping out everything I do. Clipping out my background. Clipping out my dramatic claps. Clipping out
Clips
my
and
ability
claps.
to speak.
Then we're going to take a look at the creative team because it's pretty extensive here, and it's a bit of a who's who of contemporary comic books.
Very good. Stan Lee.
No, thankfully not. None of Stan the Man Lee taking over for this particular one. So then we're going to take a look at the publication context because, let's be honest, since 2012, Michael, Thor's been on a bit of a legendary comic book journey.
Oh, Ben, what's he been up to? Pure madness.
He's been on such a run, Michael, such a run. We're going to delve a little bit closer into the narrative overall, the tropes and the themes, ladies and gentlemen. What's been written well? How's it going? What's going on?
Love tropes and themes here, Ben. That's some of our favourites.
Yeah, and then, Michael, it wouldn't be comics if we didn't take a look at art and visuals. And as I've already said, Nic Klein, mwah, chef's kiss. Matthew Wilson, a bloody maestro on the colour wheel, Michael. Oh, such colours. We're going to take a look at some standout panels, some tasty, tasty gutters, as it were, Michael. And then we're going to do a character highlight. We're going to take a look at some of our favourite characters from the run. Spoilers, ladies and gentlemen. It's an amphibian.
Yes, the frog.
It's the frog. And then we're going to take a look at what works, the influence and legacy on the character overall. Then we're going to wrap it all up nicely in a neat little bow. How does that sound? It's pretty good. Pretty good.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Benjamin, I see you've done a bit of media training. So you're going to say what you're going to do, then you're going to do it, then you're going to say what you did. Is that the plan here?
Yeah. And
very
then we're
good.
All
right.
3 reflection questions.
Benjamin, we don't have time for that. We don't have time for that, Benjamin. I'd like you to imagine that I am a Hollywood man and you're stuck in an elevator with me and you have 30 seconds to give me your pitch for a new Thor comic.
Hi there, Hollywood executive.
Hello. It's not a developed character.
He's just a very average man.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have a wacky character ready for this.
Whatever happened to Donald Blake? Or alter egos in general? Why did Marvel pretty much decide to abandon those? What was going on there?
Oh.
Yeah. So
I don't know. Do you?
Where did Donald Blake go when Thor was out and about in the world swinging a hammer? And what happens, Michael, when Thor takes over the throne of Asgard, gets all the power, and the man, the mastermind, the manipulator supreme that was Odin, loses all the bindings and fail-safes and intricate little webs of magic and lies, and they begin to decay. And it kind of signals the end, if you want, Michael, of Thor's heroic age. This is a shedding of the golden mythic age of Thor, and it's a time when Thor has to wrestle with the fact of, I'm not a shiny golden-haired god anymore. Well, I am. I remain so. But
he is.
Not on the inside.
On the inside he's rotten, Benjamin, like all of us.
Yeah. And then, Michael, I suppose really what this run is doing is it's answering that question of, what is it to be the alter ego of a mythic god from times beyond imagining, from the mythic origins of human storytelling? What's it like to be its alter ego? And how does that drive you bloody bananas?
It probably would, if you're aware of it, at the very least.
Yes, if you were suddenly made self-aware, having lived in blissful ignorance for your entire existence. And existence is the key word there, Michael. And then, Michael, what happens when such a shattered individual goes on a serial killing spree across the 9 realms with a single solid mantra? No more Thors.
Get rid of them. Thor's in the bin.
Put them in the bin. And that's what's pretty much being tackled here, Michael. This is the brainchild of a pretty extensive team, as we said, of who's, Michael.
Okay, go on.
In the industries. Donny Cates being the leading individual there. Nic Klein is the artist for 5 of the issues. He takes up the full run of Prey and was the primary artist on most of Donny Cates' run on Thor. And then at the very beginning of this, Michael, we have two-parter called Hammerfall that was penciled and inked by Aaron Cooder, another very good artist in the world of Thor. And then we got a set of delicious covers, Michael, by Olivier Coipel, as we went through.
Or Ollie C, as he's known on this podcast.
Or Ollie C, as he's known. And then we got a bloody class act of colouring on all 7 issues of this from Matthew Wilson.
Benjamin, you will pick up anything that has Donny Cates on the front of it.
I will, and I quite often don't like it afterward. Well, that's not true. I don't like some of his Marvel work. Look, Donny Cates is a bit of a lead player, Michael, in the world of Marvel Comics. He can do no wrong, but his run on this comic came to a bit of a tragic end, Michael.
Go on.
And I suppose this is a little bit timely because as the time of recording, Donny Cates has just announced his return to comic books after a 2-year hiatus.
What has he been up to?
He was in a car crash.
Is he really?
And suffered a brain injury. And believe it or not, Michael, what happened was he actually had full runs for different characters planned. And the brain trauma made it so that he couldn't follow his storylines through to completion in quite a few places.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so he's just announced his return to comic books. Michael. And Al Ewing actually took over this run in 2023 and had to wrap up some of the storylines, and then this is where we are. Now, he wrote this comic from 2020, taking over from a pretty legendary run, but we've seen it quite a few Donny Cates things. He did Doctor Strange for quite a long while, kind of reinvented the character and made him a bit more fallible, which was quite nice. He did the absolutely acid-fueled Silver Surfer Black, which introduces to bloody Null.
Get out of here, Null. Benjamin, Null's got he's too present these days, isn't he? I'm sick of him.
He's too present. It's almost like they made an entire crossover event called the King in Black about... Oh, no, they did.
They did, remember? And he was in Venom 3.
And he was in Venom 3, played by Andy Serkis.
Very
for
briefly.
some reason. But come here to me, Michael. We've actually covered Donny Cates' story on Collecting Issues before, way back in our heyday, Michael. In the early days of Collecting Issues, we did God Country, which he penned about Emmett Quinlan. Yeah.
Wasn't that about a magical sword falling from the heavens into the field of a normal man? No wonder this felt so fucking familiar.
Yep, pretty much, yeah. So Hammerfall is God Country, but if God Country was fun and not miserable.
Yeah, and nice, yeah.
Yeah.
No wonder it felt so familiar.
Yeah, so God Country is a fascinating concept of redemption. It's kind of if Jack Kirby's New Gods series had a human component to it. It involves a man being pulled into essentially a Star Wars or a bit more of an Eternia kind of escape dealing. Yeah. But it's very sad.
It is very sad, but it starts exactly the same as Hammerfall, if I remember.
It does, surely. It does. And that brings us on to Nic Klein, Michael. Nic Klein is kind of just a spectacular comic book artist, Michael. He's got all the skills whittled down to a fine point. He's currently working on the Incredible Hulk run that took over from Al Ewing. That keeps some of the horror elements that were established in the Immortal Hulk and are now continuing on through. And then his Thor work has pretty much set him up as legendary in the industry, Michael. People quite enjoy.
It's excellent, Benjamin. It's flawless. There's flawless art in this.
He's an inking maestro, Michael. An inking maestro. And then, speaking of maestros, Michael, we've got bloody Matthew Wilson. Now, Matthew Wilson has been on Thor comics since the early days of the bloody Thor run with Jason Aaron. Lady Thor.
Oh, everybody loved that, didn't they? That didn't cause any problems at all.
None at all, and we won't speak about it on this podcast. He's also a big indie man. He's worked on The Wicked and the Divine with Kieran Gillen, and he's worked on Young Avengers, which is obviously a very popular title within the Marvel canon. And he did Cliff Chang's Wonder Woman as a colorist, which is a big deal if you're into DC Comics. So again, another guy who's really just nailing it across the board. And then, Michael, one of my favourite bits about this, and I was kind of occasionally sad that Olivier Coipel wasn't doing the whole thing, because they're weird, dark, gothic-y kind of images, but he did all the covers for this. It's quite
a little bit Conan, a little bit Hyborian Age, a little bit madness and darkness.
Very epic.
This way, a little bit heavy lies the throne upon the king on the head, and so on.
I really enjoyed his cover for Hammerfall, which is Thor eating a burger in a Midwestern diner while some poor mechanic gets his shit knocked in by a troll. It's also classic rage baiting, because that doesn't happen in the fucking story.
It doesn't happen. Not even close.
It doesn't
Classic
happen.
all EC.
So there's a weird Norman Rockwell-esque kind of vision behind that particular cover, and I really enjoy it. But I also enjoy his renderings of Donald Blake's kind of feral form, especially the one there on the far right, where he's sat on the throne with Odin bleeding out and Thor bleeding out in the blood of Yggdrasil. Stuff.
Fabulous.
Very
You've always
stuff.
been a fan of the far right as well, Benjamin, famously.
Oh, fuck you. How dare you? How dare you? Down with the far right. Down with that sort of thing is what I say. But come here. Look, I've spoken a little bit there about the spectacular run that Thor has been on since 2012 with Jason Aaron. Aaron and Esad Ribic Ribic, I'm not sure how to say his name. They took over the title in 2012, and it began a saga that many listeners will probably be familiar with. Gore the God Butcher was established there.
Wild shit, Benjamin. In terms of publication context, you can't ignore the fact that 2012 is when the Avengers movie came out. The Avengers movie specifically made Thor an A-lister.
Yeah.
and change the face of Thor comics. It's been a wild decade and a half to be a fan of Thor, because Thor stories used to be like, there's someone with some vague connection to Asgard, and then Thor beats them up with his hammer. And then here's someone who's kind of connected to Asgard in some way. What's Thor going to do? He'll probably beat them up with his hammer. And the last 15 years have been wild, time traveling, multiple timelines, multiple new characters, dredging out old characters and giving them mythic makeovers. I think this is the golden age of Thor comics this decade. I know there is a golden age of Thor comics, which is when he was invented, but these are probably the best Thor comics ever written.
That 7-year run, Michael, is pretty... Also quite long for a comic artist to get 7 years on a title. You know,
Walt Simonson is spinning in his grave as I claim this is the golden age of Thor comics. We'll get comments.
We're going to get some comments. That, you know, look, this run established a ton of stuff that Donny Cates is leaning quite heavily on to build out his own heavy is the head that wears the crown narrative in his run. This established the strange future King Thor. It established young Thor, and then some timey-wimey stuff where different versions of Thor came together to tackle Gore the God Butcher. Gore the God Butcher in himself was a phenomenal villain, Michael. Not bloody Christian Bale in that fucking atrocious film. But the comic book Gore the God Butcher was a sinister little gremlin man who was a real threat, just careening about the stars, serial killing things left, right. So there seems to be a little bit of a serial killer amongst the gods seedling in this, Michael, in that Jason Aaron created Gore the God Butcher, and then Donny Cates kind of reimagines Donald Blake as the same kind of thing. And I don't know what that is. I suppose it's a great flaw in the gods. But the biggest thing that I think Jason Aaron's Thor run does is that it makes Thor not worthy. When we look at that inscription on the hammer these days, you know, whomever wields this hammer is worthy of the mantle of Thor. I can't remember the exact inscription.
Well, no, hold on. Brushing over that is very interesting, because that whole thing is where all of these stories come from, because the vagueness of that wording and the whole idea of whoever wields this hammer, if he be worthy, will wield the power of Thor. That's where all of these stories are coming from, because the whole notion of, are you wielding the power of Thor? Do you become Thor? Or does Thor switch places with you? What exactly does it mean to have the power of Thor? And that was the basis for every Thor is unworthy story. That is the basis that this springs out of, because is Thor Donald Blake? Is Donald Blake Thor? Is the Thor from the 60s comics, was he just Donald Blake with the power of Thor? When Jane Foster became Thor, was she Thor? Or was she someone with the power of Thor? Because the comic was pretty insistent that she was Thor. Not a Thor. Thor. I've said Thor so many times it's lost all meanings. So this whole concept of whether the identity of Thor is wrapped up in possessing the hammer and therefore getting the powers, that is the bullshit that this comic... I don't think it can detangle it, because you can't detangle it, because it's, at the end of the day, it's dumb, it's bullshit, it's comic book nonsense from the 60s. And this bullshit comic book nonsense from the 60s has spun out so many interpretations of what it means to be Thor. But that is a constant current running through comics.
Absolutely. Like, Jason Aaron has a quote on this, Michael.
I love a quote. Hit us with it.
So he says, I always liked the idea that Thor was the god who'd wake up every day and look at that hammer and not know whether he was going to pick it up. Only the worthy can lift the hammer of Thor, and I love the idea of a god who was always questioning his own worthiness. So in this idea, I suppose, is a doubtful god. And I think probably what makes Thor a more beloved character now is that he's not a giant, pompous, ever sure of himself gowl of a fella. And the previous 6 issues to this, Michael, is called The Devourer King. Cates' opening kind of overture into this is called The Devourer King, and it's Thor just taking up the mantle of his father Odin, getting access to the Odin Force, which is a huge, giant pool of Asgardian magic. Galactus comes down. Galactus is being chased by a fragment of his own reality from back in the day called the Black Storm, and he needs to make Thor into his herald to do that. To take him on, and he does that. He turns him into his herald, and then Thor reluctantly takes that on. But Thor gets a bit too big for his own boots, and all of Asgard comes at him going, "Oi,
Calm it down.
oi, give it a
Give it a
rest."
rest.
And we see that a little bit here at the very beginning of this run in the Hammerfall series, Michael, because Beta Ray Bill's not too happy with them.
He's like, Thor, you bollocks.
Thor, you bollocks. I would, do you know what? I think they're called Corbatians, aren't they?
Corbinites?
That's his race, isn't it? Yeah, something like that. But I want them all to have a Limerick accent in space for no reason.
Thor, you old bollocks.
Come here to me, Thor. You bollocks. That's what I want. That's canonically in my head.
Famously, Beta Ray Bill is your favorite comic book character.
Yeah, I love Beta. Unironically, Michael, I'm a fan of Beta Ray Bill.
King of the Beta.
King of the Bait, as they say. Or as they say in Limerick, Batra ye Bill. But anyway, come here to me.
Yes.
That's what's happening at the beginning in Hammerfall. And Hammerfall is really Thor reckoning with the consequences of what has happened in the previous 1 to 6 issues. We won't get into that, because that's not what we're looking at today. But that's what's happening in Hammerfall. He is giving a little middle finger to Tony Stark by publishing his public phone number. Very, very good. He is also testing out a theory, and that hypothesis, as it were, Michael, proves to be correct. It proves that anyone is allowed to pick up the Hammer of Thor now, and oh boy, that has some consequences.
Benjamin, when that fella picks up the Hammer of Thor and then strikes the ground with it, he becomes Thor. Does he?
No. See, this is the question. So, I think there's a single moment in this, Michael, that's very important, and it happens in the Hammerfall thing, and that's why it's important to include it here. There's a moment where Tony gets a bit too big for his own tin boots, Michael.
Yes, go on.
As it were. And he grabs the hammer and takes it off him and says, well, I'm going to keep this until I'm satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And Thor just goes, hold your fucking horses there, Starky boy, will you? And he brings the thunder, and he brings the lightning. And there's a very, very awesome panel, Michael, where Thor just calls all the elements around him, and he goes, don't mistake the hammer for my power. And I went, oh, well, that's interesting. That once again casts us into a world of what's going on.
But when Jane had the hammer, she was Thor, wasn't she? What?
So I think the other thing we probably have to reckon with here, and yeah, it gets confusing because she was Thor. That's what we're told. But he's not just Thor anymore. He's now the Allfather. And that pushes him again into a different realm altogether. One is off being cooked in space. So Hammerfall is interesting. Hammerfall is him trying to make sense. And it gives us our little telltale tug into why Donald Blake is being brought back. Because at the end of that Hammerfall arc, the mechanic, I think his name is Emmett again, isn't it?
I thought it was something at the beginning with A. But the interesting thing about that, Benjamin, is when that mechanic strikes the ground with the hammer and he becomes a swole Thor, does the skinny version of him go off to live in some sort of dimension, some pocket dimension?
So the answer is almost categorically no in that case.
Why?
But why? I couldn't fucking tell you.
Yeah.
Because he seems to... So this is the interesting thing, right?
Go on.
This is the interesting thing. And I think we get the answer as we go through the comic, but we'll have that debate in a little bit because it's coming, right? But I think Thor used to trade places with Donald Blake as a construct, right?
Okay.
But people don't do that anymore because he's giving Thor advice as an old mechanic.
Yes.
as an old mechanic with a troubled past. So
No.
it's very complex. But you're right, it's at the heart of this entire story, Michael. And if we don't get to the bottom of it, well, we're just going to hang up our microphones, Michael. That's
I
it.
don't think we
It's
can
all
get
up.
to the bottom of it, Ben, because as I said, this is not solvable. This is just take a swing at an aspect of this bonkers character. Thor is a
Yeah.
bonkers character, like way above and
He is.
beyond, say, Superman or Iron Man or any of these characters. Even the constant retcons and shifting of Superman in DC have nothing on Thor, because everybody who reads Thor has a different take on exactly what he is and what's going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so much so that because they came off the back of the Jason Aaron now forever lauded run on the character, not without controversy, but now, time has been very complimentary towards that run. A lot of people didn't like this run on the character because they felt it was undoing a lot of what Aaron had put in place. But that's what comics are, Michael.
Welcome
Every
to
new
monthly
run,
comics. Welcome to
Yeah.
ongoing monthly comics. This is something I meant to bring up, Benjamin, compared to some of the things we've covered on collecting issues, like, for example, God Country. This is not a limited series where you're going to get all of your questions answered and you're going to get a nice, tidy arc. This is not 8 billion genies, where every Chekhov's gun from issue 1 is going to be paid off in issue 8. This is
Absolutely
monthly
not.
comics, a stream of consciousness, constant fluctuating series of events and retcons, and none of this makes sense in monthly comics. There's loads of things that are weird in this, like Beta Ray Bill shows up in issue 2, and
Yeah.
I was looking at it going, why is Beta Ray Bill here? And it becomes abundantly clear why Beta Ray Bill is there in issue 4. Beta Ray Bill was brought in issue 2 to set him up to, pardon the wrestling terminology, do a job in episode 4.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he has to be there
Your
to get
favourite, Michael.
Oh, I love it. He has to be there to get beaten up to show how serious Donald Blake is later. This is not a tidy, self-contained story. If you're expecting a tidy, self-contained story, it's only okay.
Go expect it somewhere else.
Go buy yourself something that was envisaged from start to beginning to be an 8-episode arc of something. But this is monthly comics, boys and girls and everyone else.
And everyone else in between. But look, the other thing that Donny Cates is doing is really placing his mark on the Thor mythos, Michael. So we've spoken a little bit here about the chaos of what wielding the hammer of Thor means. Do you know? So Donny Cates has opened up the dusty old suitcase of Thor lore, and he's worked his way through it, and he's played absolute havoc with some of it, and then he's given kind of a loving little embrace to other parts of it that maybe get overlooked. So look, Thor's history is pretty extensive, but we get quite a few characters. The key one among them, Michael, is Donald Blake himself, right?
Yeah.
Donald Blake himself gets a pretty interesting treatment here. And once again, Michael, this is a very timely episode. It wasn't intended to be, but in the latest issue of The Immortal Thor, which is Al Ewing's continuation of this run from 2023, there's a mystery cover of a man carrying a duffel bag,
Oh, who is it?
and it says, "Gods walk among us." So it looks like we might be getting young Donald Blake again in this, because he's popped up a few times since this comic. We'll get into that a bit later. But originally, Michael, he was just Thor's mortal alter ego. And
No.
this is where... Go on.
He wasn't. This is the thing. That's a retcon. Originally, he was the man who found the walking stick that turned out to be the hammer.
Yeah.
He was the original character. Thor was someone he turned into, like Captain Marvel or any of those classic I do a thing and I become a hero characters. Thor looked like Donald Blake pumped up, exactly like Captain Marvel looks like an adult Billy Batson. The version of Thor that we got was Donald Blake without his limp, with muscles, and with the flowing blonde hair of a god.
Pretty much. And he was a physician first, and then a Thor second, and it was a classic 60s gig where he made his first appearance in a comic anthology called Journey into Mystery, Michael, number 83 in 1962. And that was when it was the good old, as we often say on this podcast, Michael, it was the spaghetti on the wall method of creating characters for comics. But even then, Michael, you know, back in those early Thor stories, he was always going up against aliens. Exactly like the Hulk was always going up against aliens. Exactly like the Fantastic Four was going up against aliens. It's like, oh, it's yellow rock men from outer space. They've hit the Earth. Only Thor can stand against them. Or any of the other ridiculously overpowered heroes who occupy New York, where these people always pop up.
Yes, very good.
But yeah, so he's there, he's established, and some people may not have liked this. I thought this was a really interesting take on the character, and we'll probably get into him a little bit later, Michael, in our character highlight. But I thought Donny Cates did a very interesting job of madness on this character. In some ways, a very justified take on a construct that was essentially kept in a Pleasantville style Eden and forgotten about, just left behind in the history of Thor. Because that's what's happened. Comics have moved firmly away from the notion of Donald Blake.
Yeah, comics have moved firmly away from the notion of characters are shunting places. Like it's Rick Jones and the Negabands. Is Hulk Bruce Banner? Where does Bruce Banner go? Does he become Hulk, or is he inside the Hulk, or is he shunted to another dimension? Is Shazam Billy Batson, or are they separate characters? Is Miracle Man whoever Miracle Man is when he's not Miracle Man?
Yeah, it's a complicated trading places thing, and we're going to do a little deep dive on that a little bit later, Michael, because it is a fascinating idea and leads to some really interesting horror in the comic that I wasn't expecting. The other character that pops up in this as a charred corpse only, Michael, is Red Norvell. I couldn't get over this. So this is a bizarre death that takes place off panel, as it were. Donald Blake's first victim when he has his mind shattered and he makes it out of Asgard and he goes on the hunt. And Red Norvell was this bizarre attempt at jazzing up Thor in 1978. He appeared in Thor 273, and he was a photojournalist called Red. He gained the power of Thor through Asgardian magic and enchantments. Red was once again a plan of the manipulative bastard that is Odin to create a surrogate Thor to fulfill Ragnarok's prophecy, and he temporarily had Mjolnir and died heroically until it was retconned in this that he was living out his days somewhere in America until Donald Blake found him and burnt him to a crisp with lightning. Just
Benjamin,
a charred, smouldering corpse.
You know who really gets off the hook lightly in this?
Go on.
And probably would have made more sense as that character is Eric Masterson, aka Thunderstrike.
Thunderstrike is there. We see a little glimpse of Thunderstrike being torn out of the Book of Remembering or whatever that the thing is.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
Donald Blake is just like, fuck you and fuck you and fuck you.
Do you think at some stage Thunderstrike was going to bite it in this? And then someone said, actually, we killed him off 15 years ago, I think. It's probably not worth the time to go and check.
Already dead?
I said, we have this Red Norvell guy. Or I suppose, you could go with the Wreckers. I think the Wreckers have the power of Thor as well. You could get one of them.
They have Asgardian construction tools. Yeah.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. Some of the characters just get zipped in and zipped out. But one of my favorites in this, Michael, who gives an absolute stonking performance as just a little hellion, is Throg. I
Throg.
fucking love this.
Benjamin, this is the best showing Throg has ever had.
It's the best he's ever done.
Oh, it's fucking wild.
So I didn't realize, I did a little bit of digging on this, Michael. I didn't realize because there's that one splash page in the, I think it's the 3rd issue, where there's a frog being dissected in a class.
Yeah, very good.
And we're led to believe, thanks to some really spectacular signposting from Cates and Klein, because Donald Blake is dispatching people in a very surgical manner to kind of mimic his doctor origin.
Exactly.
We're led to believe that he has Victorian-aged, vivisected Throg onto a board. But it's not, because then Donald Blake gets thrown through the wall of a school.
He gets an
essentially.
absolute walloping from Throg and Lockjaw.
From Throg and Lockjaw. And Michael, nom.
Great
the
stuff.
splash page that introduces Throg to the entire comic is pure magic. It's the scene where him and Lockjaw are bounding out of a forest going run to Donald Blake. They're like, you cheeky little shit.
Yeah.
You came here and you were going to take me on, bloody Throg. And then I found out, Michael, that Throg is a human.
Throg's a human.
I thought it was a frog.
No, there are 2 frog Thors, hilariously. So there was a whole thing where Thor himself got turned into a frog
Yeah.
and got turned by Loki, presumably. And then there's a whole other
Presumably.
story where a human gets turned into a frog and gets a shard of Mjolnir.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
So is he Thor? What the fuck? Anyway, this is the best showing Throg has ever had. This comic is worth reading just for Throg kicking the shit out of Donald Blake.
There is one of my favorite things about this, Michael, is there are severe horror elements. We just talked about the vivisection of a frog, live on the thing. Donald Blake, both from his mind-shattering event, which is essentially the Eden-like construct of his forever town, his forever white picket fence shattering, that turns him into self-aware construct. Because we're led to believe, Michael, from the beginning of this is quite important, that he was a construct created by Odin to test his son's mettle. Because as we've established firmly, Odin's a prick. So Odin essentially created a false hardship for his son to go through. It's a bit like if your dad owns a Fortune 500 company.
Yes.
And then says, no, but my boy is going to start in the copy room because he needs to learn life's knocks. But also at the same time, you're going, oh, and if he doesn't do well there, he's not getting a job, is he, sir?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, no, I didn't say that. He's still going to be vice president, CEO, but he's going to start in the copy room.
And he's going to be attacked by trolls in
And
the
he's going
copy
to be
room.
attacked by trolls. That
And
has to
everyone
happen.
else who works in
So-
the copy room is going to be under the constant threat of attack by trolls. So,
But that happens. That's a thing. Like, that's such a thing. Because Odin is a prick.
fuck you, Odin, you son of a bitch.
And what happens is, like, the horror of that event, Michael, is something that Jorgemund, and I'm going to get into that in a second because the Norse elements of this are great, but Jorgemunder, the world serpent, is just like, I'm going to fuck with everyone in Asgard now. Look at this little forgotten bit of Thor. I'm going to have some fun with this. And Michael, the body horror elements of that scalpel-wielding psychopath are phenomenal.
I love when he's doing the little stabs. He's doing little fast stabs on everyone.
He's such an evil little fucker.
Oh, he's the...
He's great. And that there's those slight body horror elements because Throg gives one of the best things I've ever seen. Donald Blake eats him mid-strike. He grabs him and he shoves him in his mouth. And then Throg smashes his way through his front teeth with Mjolnir, with his little fragment of Mjolnir.
Serves him right.
And leaves him a bloodied mess. And they win. This is the thing. Like, they whoop the shit out of him until they bring him to Stephen Strange. And then it all goes pear-shaped. But yeah, like, so fascinating. But the best storyline with Throg in it I've ever seen.
Great, fabulous. It's Thor's day.
And then there's poor old Beta Ray Bill.
Beta Ray Bill doing an absolute job here. It's like, hello, I'm here and I'm slightly mad, so I'll just hang about until I'm needed, I guess. Well, you're needed to lose a fight. Oh, not again.
You quite often call it the Hulk effect, Michael, where in order for a character to show their threat, they kick the shit out of the Hulk.
Yeah.
Good example, Michael.
Yeah.
A good example. So I always think of Beta Ray Bill as the inspiration for Alan the Alien in the Invincible comics.
Oh, yeah.
Because their storylines are nearly identical. The Corbinite race were genetically quite a simpering lot. Not fabulous. Not very strong.
That's why
very
he's a
buff.
beta, Ben.
That's why he's a beta, yes. That's what it is. And what happened was that the poor old Corbynites from Limerick, they were like, do you know what? I'm sick of getting my hide handed to me. That wasn't, hang on, I'll do a better Limerick next time. But anyway, they're pretty much sick of everyone coming around giving them a whooping. So they decide to eugenics themselves into a stronger race.
Yeah.
And poor old Bill is their only successful candidate. And so what he receives is a horrific amount of body modification, cybernetics, all kinds of stuff. And they turn him into the horse-faced monstrosity that he is. And he becomes their champion. And then, once again, Odin, the prick, decides to use him to teach his son a lesson. And he gives him Mjolnir and takes it away from Thor. And Thor has to go up against Bill to get his hammer back.
Why is Bill not Thor? Why was Jane was Thor, but Bill is not Thor? What's going on?
That happens. But all these guys are floating around, Michael. They're doing, but as you rightfully put it, Michael, they're doing a job in this particular case.
Oh,
they're
big time.
all there to show the threat of Donald Blake. And I quite like it. One of the things that I think is done really well here, though, is Norse myth. I didn't like how much the Marvel movies distanced themselves from the mythic element of Thor. And Jason Aaron made quite a huge effort to re-establish Thor as a god and as a timeless being and as someone who has been around longer than the Norse sagas that are written about him. He would visit Earth during that time, and that's how those stories got written, but he's been floating around space for millennia, is what we're led to believe. And Donny Cates is kind of continuing that, but leaning even more into the unreality that is Norse mythology. So I always think of this as kind of, I always use Doctor Who's timey-wimey principle for this. When you try and get too Brandon Sanderson on your lore systems or your magic systems, and you try to mechanize them down to the nth level of rules and kind of physics that work for them, they tend to break. So it's easier from a writing point of view to be like, oh, it's timey-wimey stuff. It's, you know.
It's wibbly-wobbly.
And I think Donny Cates does that pretty spectacularly in this, where he he essentially creates a Norse mythology that is constantly rubbing up against the superhero world of Marvel. In this case, this all comes about, and at the time I was like, why is Donald Blake so powerful? Why is Donald Blake running around taking everybody out? He hasn't even got Mjolnir. Why has he got power?
He hasn't even got Mjolnir. He hasn't got any powers. What's going on? Who is this guy? Why is he suddenly super dangerous until he isn't?
And then you find out that Jormungandr snuck on in there, Michael, and was like, you know, you could have some of my power and we could both go and fuck with Thor. And Donald Blake was like, yes, give it to me. And then he Jeremy Irons'd him and let Jormungandr fall off the cliff and said, long live the king.
Yeah.
And then he took all his power.
He stabbed him with a scalpel shitload of times.
Just Donald Blake running around shivving the shit out of people. Then, like, the other bizarre moment, Michael, is fucking Ratatosk.
Where'd that guy come from?
So I didn't realize this, Michael. This was established in The Invincible Squirrel Girl, which came out, I think, 3 years before this.
Go on.
And the Invincible Squirrel Girl runs up against this character. Ratatosk is a chaos god within the pantheon of Norse mythology, right?
Okay.
And he's the squirrel god. He's a messenger god, essentially. But for some reason, they created this furry wet dream of a creature and said, yeah, that's it. And it's quite accurate in terms of the big spike in the middle of his forehead, because all the ancient depictions of him from the Edda have it as well.
Yes.
But he's just nightmare fuel, isn't he? Look at him. Look at him.
I saw him and went, is this a
Creepy
Japanese guy? Is this one of those Japanese gods back from the Chaos War arc? But it's not. He's Norse through and through.
Yeah, in everything except visual representation, I think, in certain cases. But look, that Norse mythology is constantly there. I think even down to Donald Blake's initial appearance, I think he's supposed to kind of mimic Fenris or Fenrir, the wolf of the end times, as this kind of feral madman that goes about. And one of the biggest disappointments for me in this, Michael, is that he abandons that visage to be Donald Blake.
I know. Because he looks so cool. This mad kind of wild man character in dragon scale armor with his big bushy hair and big wild beard and mad eyes, snapping the bloody stick over his knee, which is Mjolnir, I think. I don't know. But yeah,
I don't know.
It's a cool and interesting look of like he's the skinny weakling shadow of Thor empowered.
Yeah. It's bizarre, and it's very Carl Jung, and it's very shadow self. If you don't do the work, it's gonna come and get you. And that true line of myth is constantly there in this, and I really appreciate it, even down to the ending where Thor is like, all right, Loki, you deal with him. And Loki gives him the same punishment that Loki receives for eternity for killing Baldur, which is to be chained to a rock and have venom and poison poured in your eyes by a serpent.
Yeah.
For all eternity.
I believe that serpent's Norse name is Drippy Snake.
Drippy Snake. Drippy Snakey. Very, very important. And what happens is he then becomes the god of lies, which Loki, big mistake, buddy. No, absolutely not. Don't be handing that mantle over to anyone. But yeah, so I quite liked that. So you said to me at the start of this, Michael, you said, I want to have a quick word about alter ego. So I want to look into this madness that is Thor is Donald, Donald is Thor. Not really, though.
Yeah, look, this is a thing throughout comics. And I know I keep going back to Alan Moore and Twilight of the Gods stuff, but Alan Moore, Grant E.M., Neil Gaiman, they're all people who love playing around with this duality of superheroes of... Okay, so there's a duality of superheroes of Batman is the real person and Bruce Wayne is the secret identity. And the same for Superman is the real person and Clark Kent is the secret identity. Or, to go from the Marvel side, Peter Parker is the real person and Spider-Man's a character he invents to protect his family and his loved ones. But then you get into the body swap genre of superhero fiction. I'm a scrawny little weakling, and I can't imagine me as a scrawny little weakling being a superhero. So I find a thing, a magic stick, a magic word, a pair of technological super bracers that turn me into some sort of god amongst men. But do they turn me into him, or do they actually swap me places with him? And this is ripe for horror and comedy and exploration of identity in superheroes. I think it's Marvel Man by Alan Moore, where you get shunted off into a nothing dimension that's just blank. While the superheroes run rampant in a version of your body that isn't your body. And I mean, I firmly believe that the origin of Thor was built around the idea of Donald Blake's the real person, and he gets the power of the semi-fictional god Thor. But very quickly they ditched that idea because having the character be Thor is more interesting.
Well, it gives you a lot more to work with.
Exactly.
My favourite bit about old Thor stories is that, and proving your point, is that Thor would come up against something from Norse mythology and go, what is this? Whereas now, when Thor comes up against something from mythology, he goes, oh, it's fucking Fenrir again.
It's not Fenrir again.
Christ.
Has anyone seen Donald Blake? This should have been called Has Anyone Seen Donald Blake? I mean, I love the word play on the word prey, as in predator and prey, but also prey to the gods. Nom nom nom, delicious. Not subtle, but delicious.
No, but so this is played with a couple of times, right? So Donald Blake has a full mental breakdown, right? And I think one of the greatest scenes of horror in this is when Thor is first walking through the neighborhood that has now been essentially dissected by Donald Blake. He has ripped open the town, living, inanimate, everything like that, and painted signs like, where is Thor? Thor, where are you? In blood all over the town. And it's because we find out that Donald Blake had faith in Thor and understood his role not as a construct, but that Thor was something he believed in outside of himself. And we find out that he's forgotten and then suddenly becomes sentient because that web of deceit and magic began to diminish when when Odin gives up the Odin Force, and it's gone, and he snaps completely, and basically his entire existence is false. It's all planted memories. And he gives a little chat about his time in Nicaragua working for Medicine Sans Frontiers or Doctors Without Borders. I can't remember which one it is. And
They're
he's
the
like,
same thing, Ben.
except I did. Yeah, okay. And then he's like, except I didn't do that. And nobody suffered. And I just have the memory of all those miseries implanted in my brain. And he blames Odin, which is what I find most interesting. And it's kind of the, you know, the Epicurean philosophical on good and evil and an evil god. If God has unlimited power and is completely good, then he has the power to extinguish evil and wants to extinguish it. But if he does not do so, and if its knowledge of evil is limited, so it is not all-knowing, and if a god is all-knowing and totally good and then allows evil to exist, he is not a good god. And that's kind of what's driving Donald Blake constantly. He's like, you're an asshole.
Yeah.
You're a shitty little...
To summarize Epicurean's philosophy there, Benjamin, Odin's a prick.
Odin's a prick.
He's just doing things without any care for the consequences.
Nobody thinks about Donald Blake, including Jane Foster, who's like, Donald, I haven't seen you in ages. Where have you been?
Where have you been? I was Thor briefly. Weren't you also Thor? Or what was Thor you? What? How does that work, by the way? Because when I was Thor, I was Thor. Were you Thor? How come you're different? And how come when I was Thor, I was the same person, but you're a construct? What's going on? Make this make sense, Donald.
I love how long it takes her to twig that Donald's gone fucking spare.
About half a lunch.
And I love the flash in the pan violence of his fantasies. Like, he stabs Jane through the hand in his head. He has a real Patrick Bateman moment.
Yeah, there's
there's
a good bit of Patrick Bateman to Donald Blake in this, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. And one of my favorite mechanics of this story is how he reefs the magic out of people. Like he does it to Bill, he does it in his head to Jane.
But Ben, I thought Bill's horse face was cybernetic enhancement, not Thor powers.
Yeah, so where the fuck are we now? Where the fuck are we now?
What's going on? Just go with it.
Look,
just roll with it. Don't ask too many questions.
But that's what I'm going to say, right? That's what I'm going to say. And that's why I'm leaning on timey-wimey here. Or mithy-withy, as we're going to put it in this
that's
podcast,
better. That's
right?
better. Yeah.
Mithy-withy, because this is a fun fucking comic. This is great stuff. I love when people use the weird, obscure, silly lore of the 1960s and bring it back with a bit of an edge. I found this surprisingly funny. I haven't seen a funny side to Donny Cates' writing before, but there's a few different moments in this where I genuinely had a little giggle. There's a single moment where Donald Blake is going through the armory in Asgard and he looks up at the destroyer arm and he goes, how do I turn you on again? And I was like, very funny. Then my favourite bit of this, Michael, is that Lockjaw is a royalist and Valkyrie's horse is a cockney. And they have a brief exchange. But that's a real talent of Donny Cates, because he does it with Doctor Strange as well. Bats is the dog, the ghost dog. Yeah. It's kind of like a New York taxi driver in the 1950s.
Everyone's got magic pets.
But Donny Cates has a real talent for funny comic animals, and Lockjaw gets called a royalist wazzock by Valkyrie's horse, and I was like, yeah, all right.
I like that Valkyrie's horse's name is Horse as well. That's the best thing about it.
Yeah, it's just called Horse.
Yeah,
it's just called Horse. So look, we've spoken about some spectacular panels here, Michael, but this can't go without saying the entire Prey run is beautifully drawn and coloured.
Fabulous.
By Nic Klein and Matthew Wilson. I think the initial introduction to Donald Blake again, where he snaps the Cain / Mjolnir / God knows in half, the inking on that armor. He does jet black armor really well in contrast. Like it's really well done. The action scenes he puts together, Michael, and I'm going to speak about it in a second. My favorite perfect panel from this are insane. Like, there's the splash page with Throg and Lockjaw. Great. Just an incredible work of color. I've never seen so many colors used, balanced so well.
Green.
And keeping contrast.
Blue.
Like, it's unreal. There's some
Right.
really great scenes. There's one of my favorite kind of throwaway panels is the scene where we, in the previous page, learned that now Donald Blake is essentially Jorgemundr. He's half reptile, and through the coffee cup you see the kind of evil eyes, and he's eating the really rare steak, and there's bits like this. And then just as a showcase of sheer action is the I've eaten Throg, oh fuck, I don't feel very well. And then a baby Mjolnir flying out and smashing the shit out of people.
There's a
Like,
Brian
just
Hitch-esque
amazing.
quality to those panels as well.
Yeah.
That's very early 2000s extreme comics, widescreen comics, body horror stuff.
Yeah, on our Instagram and our TikTok, Michael, we put out a few reasons to read this comic, and one of them was the color work from Matthew Wilson. He manages to move locations constantly, but through this really mapped out color scheme for each dimension, we're actually able to figure out when we're in Asgard, and figure out when we're on Earth, and figure out when we're, in some bizarre hell realm that they get, and we know when we're below Yggdrasil, all based on color. And it means that we're not going, where the fuck are we now? What
Where
is
are we now?
this?
Who's
What
this
the
fella?
fuck?
Who's going? Benjamin, this is just peak current superhero mainstream comics. This I look forward to looking back on this in 20 years and thinking and figuring out how we look back on this era. And will we remember like runs like this as the peak of this particular style?
I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
In Nic Klein and Matthew Wilson's case, I think it's spectacular. I'm going to quickly, we're rapidly approaching wrap up here, Michael, but I'm going to quickly jump in. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a Substack, and I have written an essay on this panel that I want to talk about really quickly with Michael. This is the panel where Beta Ray Bill does the job, as it were, and gets
Bring him in to do a job.
Gets his shit rocked, right? And this is one of the most spectacular bits of choreographed violence I've ever seen in a comic book. It is a splash page across 2 pages. In the center is Bill being stabbed in the back by the feral Donald Blake with his little scalpel. And the panels are made up of slash strokes throughout the image, and it's done in this beautiful almost red monotone in the background, and then full color in the 2 figures at the center.
Stab.
Stab. And it shows the speed and ferocity of Donald Blake and the efficiency in him as a result of his strange tie to still being a surgeon in his head. Even though he never was. He wasn't this thing.
Or was he?
Which also begs a question. Did he ever perform surgery on people? Did this construct go around with no medical license in New York hospitals?
I'm sure he did.
Mithy Withy.
Mithy Withy, don't worry about it.
Mithy Withy.
Don't worry about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not watching us on YouTube, and you really should be, you can find it linked below in the description. You're missing all the times we say Mithy Withy and wave our hands around.
Don't worry about it.
But yeah, this is a spectacular panel. You can read a full essay breakdown of this on our Substack, linked below in the description. Go and read it. Go and have a look. We break down exactly why it's genius. It's just a beautiful piece of comic art, and this entire run is littered with stuff like this. It is phenomenal.
Why is Beta Ray Bill getting stabbed by a scalpel? That shouldn't affect him. I still don't know how he killed
Big
that
magic
giant
scalpel.
dragon. I don't know how he killed that big giant dragon with one little small scalpel. Don't worry about it. Mithy Withy. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Michael, give me your closing thoughts on this run, because you're something of a Thor aficionado.
I am something of a Thor aficionado, Ben, and I have...
You're Mr. Thor.
I'm not Mr. Thor. I wish I was Miss Thor. No, Benjamin, I don't want to marry the fictional character Thor. I read this when it came out. Because I do buy Thor comics monthly. It was a much more coherent and satisfying thing to read in a collected issue, which is why I like the format of collecting issues, the monthly comic book club.
We're a book club of some sorts.
I'll be totally honest. When you're reading Thor comics monthly, and all this wild shit is happening, and you're going, do I remember this? Do I remember Red Norvell? Who's this old man mechanic who's Thor for an issue? These comics do lend themselves better to being enjoyed in a collecting issue. They always read better in a collecting issue. I think this is I think this is very good. It's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. And the more you try to justify what's going on, I think the more you lose from it. This is a real case of just go with it. Just go with it. Just enjoy it. Don't worry about it too much. Take the fact that this is an artist, a writer and artist, playing with an aspect of the myth. And I don't necessarily mean the myth, the Norse myth. I mean the comic book myth. The legendarium of Thor as a comic book character cannot be fixed. He is a broken character. There's too much going on, and he swings wildly between a character of myth, a standard superhero, magic being science we just don't understand yet. All of these things are at play. Whether he's Donald Blake, identity is at play, and because it's not the singular vision of a singular creator, you're never going to get a simple answer to this. So enjoy it for an aspect. Enjoy it for a glimpse of a fragment of the mythos of the modern comic book Thor. And then it's almost perfect.
Yeah, it's a really great 7 issues of fun.
And the absolute 8, and the absolute best showing of Throg of all time. Throg is my favourite character now.
Fabulous. Fabulous stuff.
I can't
Just
believe there
great.
not a 6-inch Marvel Legends Throg, which would make him life-size. Why does this not exist? And if it does exist, why don't I have it?
Michael, I'm going to get better at 3D sculpting just for you, and I'm going to sculpt you a little frog that you can print.
Thank you very much.
That's what I'm going to do, based on that little splash page where he's charging out of the trees.
Yeah.
But Michael, speaking of broken characters,
yes, go on.
You and I do this every month on collecting issues.
Yeah, we're broken characters. I get it now.
Comic book club.
Yes.
And ladies and gentlemen, friends beyond the binary, if you've enjoyed this particular episode, there's a few different things you can do. First of all, share it with a pal. I know you have some. You have some, and I know they know who Thor is. So just share it with them. Just go to the little share icon. Do that.
Yeah, send it to them.
Or
yes,
follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, wherever you're listening. It's all linked below in the description. Give us a follow. Even better, if you think we were any use, give us a review.
A nice one, though, please.
We'd love that.
For our egos.
Yeah, we're very fragile. As we said, broken characters. As we said. But you can also keep up to date with a whole host of other things that we're doing on various social media platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, we're on Instagram at Collecting Issues. We're on TikTok at Collecting Issues. We're on Threads at Collecting Issues. We're on Blue Sky at Collecting Issues. We're bloody everywhere. We're on YouTube where you can see our faces and we can do flappy, mythy-withy stuff. We're also on Substack, as I said before. The essay that I mentioned earlier in the episode is down below in the description. I try and write various essays about some of the comics I'm reading. We have a nice review of the excellent telepathic mechanic of Martian Manhunter from Donny Cates and Javier I can't remember his second name, damn it, Javier Castor. I got it, there we go, very nice. And ladies, gentlemen, friends beyond the binary, if you want to tune into our next one and have your say on your favourite bits of it and have them mentioned on this podcast, hop up on the Discord. It's linked below in the description.
Hop
Our next comic is a 10-issue behemoth, Michael.
Oh my god. Better start reading now.
Interwoven Tales. Yeah, from Ram V and Dan Waters. This is The One Hand and the Six Fingers from Image Comics. It's the story of Neo Novena, who is a detective, Ari Nazar, a grizzled homicide detective, who's about to retire with an enviable record until a brutal murder occurs bearing all the hallmarks of the one-hand killer, which should be impossible since Ari already put him away not once but twice. In the Six Fingers, Neo Novena, archaeology student Johannes Valle, has always been so very in control of his life, but when he commits a brutal murder using the MO of a historic and notorious serial killer, everything begins to spiral out of control, and Johannes doesn't remember doing it. What follows is a deadly cat-and-mouse game told through two intertwined narratives.
How exciting. How exciting. Deadly cat and mouse. And frog.
Yeah, so that'll be at the end of June, ladies and gentlemen. We're a little bit late on this one. Well, that's it from us. Goodbye.
See you soon. Thanks for listening.